Welcome to Subject to Power. I'm Elle. I have to issue a little bit of a warning with this one because it's quite grim. We talk about serial sex killers pretty much the entire hour in a critical way, not a sensationalist way at all, but nevertheless, please proceed with caution. But to frame this conversation, we as in the collective everybody, we are so soaked, steeped, and pickled in sexual violence and sexual murder that we simply accept it as an inevitable fact of life. It's on our feeds, it is on our television screens, it is in books, it is in real life, it is on the news, it is everywhere. Our history and mythology is rife with it. Wars, past and present, are settings for mass rape and killing, as was the witch craze, and many other cultural phenomena created as an opportunity for men to torture and kill women and girls. All of our lives, obviously, are maimed by the pervasive amount of sexual violence men perpetuate onto women and children. And while we may react with abhorrence and outrage to it, we don't turn the world upside down to stop it. My guest on this episode, Professor of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies and author Jane Caputi, wrote a fantastic book 40 years ago called The Age of Sex Crime. In this book, Jane takes a close look at one particular expression of men's sexual violence, that of the individual serial sex killer. In the book, Jane analyzes the histories of well-known individual serial sex killers, from Jack the Ripper to the Boston Strangler to Ted Bundy and many, many more, and answers fundamental questions about how and why they came to be and how they fit into our cultural narratives. She argues that far from being monstrous and aberrations, serial sex murderers occupy a role in our patriarchal culture that is both accommodated and endorsed. In this hour, I talk with Jane about all aspects of serial sex killing, the folk hero appeal of the serial killers themselves, how sexual terror helps to preserve male power, how the serial killers and police and media co-create monster genius mastermind narratives, and how these narratives fit hand in glove with a common collective male fantasy of hurting women. We also talk about the real silencing of victims and how women everywhere are invited to identify with the serial killer's victims, both in the real-life cases, then in the true crime media that retells the gruesome details, and then, finally, in the fictional movies, books, and television that serves up an endless buffet of dead women, bloody sacrifices to male power. Welcome back to Subject to Power. I'm so thrilled to speak with you.
Thanks for reading The Age of Sex Crime and being interested in it.
I think it's such an important book, and I'm a little bit shocked that this subject matter is not covered more actively, in particular by feminists.
I agree. I mean, you'll have a lot of stuff on femicide, right? If I had titled the book differently, maybe Femicide in the Age of Serial Killers or something, who knows? But I think it's also because I've been told, I try and connect up so many different ideas. I bring in here the history of the witch craze, as you point out, gynecology, AI even. So people tell me I bring in so much, it's overwhelming, but that's just the way I think.
I don't find it overwhelming at all. I find it like kind of a revelation to connect so many disparate dots in the culture. But I wanted to go back a little bit to just prepare listeners. So Today we're going to be talking about a book you wrote almost 40 years ago in 1987 called The Age of Sex Crime. And so maybe you can just introduce the book and what it is and what prompted you to write it then.
It actually was my PhD dissertation in 1982. It's modified, but anyway, I was studying American culture with a concentration on popular culture at Bowling Green State University, and I was taking a class on folklore with Ray Brown. And so I was learning about folklore and legends and this kind of folk or outlaw hero. And then the local movie night on the campus showed Time After Time, which was a story that imagined that H.G. Wells and Jack the Ripper knew each other. H.G. Wells didn't know it was Jack the Ripper, and Jack the Ripper was about to be caught, so he got an H.G. Wells time machine and came to 1979 in San Francisco. And seeing the kind of sexually violent culture, he said, "Oh my goodness, I'm home. This is my world. The world has finally caught up to me." And I think it all sort of came together to me that, oh yeah, not only is Jack the Ripper a folk hero, but he is in some way the spirit of the age, dare I say. And I found that phrase, the age of sex crime, in this British crime writer, Colin Wilson, and I used it because I wanted to capture that this serial sex killer, particularly Jack the Ripper, who remains a historically unknown figure. There's a lot of speculation about his identity, but that who the serial killer was, serial sex killer, and his actions and his significance in some way were a paradigm, a model, an exemplar to understand the modern era, an era built on, obviously, patriarchy and misogyny. I mean, it's difficult to conceptualize how this could have happened, but that there is this segment of humanity, mostly, of course, patriarchal men, who really fuses sex and violence and their domination to such a degree that the only outcome is apocalypse, whether that apocalypse is enacted on what they perceive as the ultimate symbol of the source of life, female genitals and womb and a woman's body, as well as the imagination of global apocalypse with nuclear weapons or with AI making humanity obsolete or whatever. It all seemed to me to be part and parcel of the same thing.
Yeah.
And then I watched another movie, Dr. Strangelove, the classic Stanley Kubrick's film from 1963. And of course, it's a scenario where there's a madman general. He's a conspiracy theorist. The madman general who decides to protect his purity of essence, his potency, he's going to unleash nuclear war. His name is General Jack D. Ripper. So the popular culture in popular symbolism is making the connection. So wow, right? So I wanted to explore all of this, and turned out to be my dissertation and then this book.
And you really do, it's all in there. Ritual, symbolism, popular culture, our actual history, how all of these sort of institutions work together in this sort of shadow network of sex and violence. So if you describe The Age of Sex Crime, the book, and The Age of Sex Crime as a concept, how do you want people to understand it?
That hetero-patriarchal culture fuses sex and violence. Look at the word F, the F word, right? I mean, it can either mean I want to make love to you or I want to completely eviscerate and destroy you, which I think says a great deal about how sexuality has become completely conflated with violence and vice versa. And that this is necessary because patriarchy's built a masculine domination of whatever it perceives as the feminine. And that this is ultimately a matter of complete coercive control, but also complete domination. And that ultimately is a form of annihilation. So the serial sex killer emerges as this symbol not only of that supreme annihilation, whether it be of the individual woman's body or of the planet, and that in this way, the serial killer is performing a ritual act. As you said, I brought in the idea of ritual. This is a kind of ritual act affirming that this is what the world is. The world is a patriarchy, and that patriarchy has to continually be recreated through myth and ritual. So the myth is that of the patriarchal God, who is not of this earth, who actually made Mother Earth, right? Who is abstract and masculine out there and rules over all, is omnipotent, and who is immortal and who can decide life and death. So the serial sex killer and the God come together. They enact this kind of imagined apocalypse of the planet, which is actually predicted in the New Testament of the Catholic religion. And then the serial killer himself attains a sort of immortality. They become legend. This myth and legend and this ritual act continually recreates patriarchy. Any kind of system has to continually be fed, be recreated, both in worldview as well as in actual practice. So that's what we see going on.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. So before we dig into various aspects of the book, you wrote it 40 years ago. What, in your mind, what are major changes that have happened? Or do you look at it differently? Or have you changed your thinking in some substantial way?
I can't say I've really changed my thinking in any substantial way. I was reading it again this morning and thinking, I still agree with it. The seeds of this book went into my last book, Call Your Mother, Deliberately Dirty-Minded Manifesto for the Earth Mother in the Anthropocene. I'm still stuck on this idea that the ultimate aim of patriarchy is a kind of apocalyptic scenario for the Earth. And that it's permutated. We have the mass shooter now, right? But it's so much of these mass shootings, domestic violence, they're all hinging on misogyny. Even these killers who are talking in May 2026, they went to a mosque in San Diego with the intent to slaughter people, and they published a manifesto. And in this manifesto, they talk about how, Jews are the enemy, but then women are the ultimate enemy, they say. I'm not quoting exactly, but so this kind of misogyny, most of these mass shooters, 67% of mass shootings also involve some kind of what we think of as intimate partner or family or domestic violence. They kill their mother, they kill their spouse, they kill a sister, children, and then they go off and commit mass murder. So this misogyny that is really firing up this destruction, this sort of sexual sadism and delight in destruction, as well as then the desire to become immortal. So I went to this serial killer exhibit in New York. Are you in New York?
I am in New York. There is one.
Down in Union Square. It's called The Mind of the Serial Killer. I don't recommend this to anyone, except, at first I thought it is very informative, but it's also sensationalist. They recreate Jeffrey Dahmer's kitchen with body parts in the head, as well as a shrine he was making to himself. A religious fixation is often part of these serial sex killers and mass shooters. It's sensationalist in that way, but it's also informative, and it has things like their significance in the history of serial killers, their key traits, their modus operandi. And I was thinking, wouldn't it be great to have a mind of a tech bro or a mind of a billionaire? And who's doing this damage on a much larger scale? And you would find many of the same traits: narcissism, need for control and domination, masculine ideation.
Thinking you're God, wanting to be God.
Thinking you're God, right. And you have absolute control over others, yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, the idea of God that we have is actually a projection of the patriarchal ego, right? This abstract masculinity off in heaven.
Of course. Yeah.
Having nothing to do with nature or matter or the body.
Or creation.
No, really very much associated with destruction.
Yeah.
So they create this image of God, and then they create a technology and an ego in the model of that God. And that wreaks terrible destruction, of course.
Yeah. Now, this fact that it's men wreaking violence on women and children, I should say, patriarchy takes great care in covering this fact up. And that we often talk about all of these crimes that you just talked about as people who torture and kill, people who mutilate, people, misogyny is not at all recognized in law enforcement as a motive for crime. When women end up dead, the police or law enforcement is often mystified, or the whole system calls it a motiveless crime, more or less,
right.
Because misogyny in itself has been invisibilized. So however you want to talk about that.
Yeah, you said it. The refusal to recognize hatred, misogyny, hatred of the feminine. I mean, feminists have been talking about this for so long, either in crimes like, rape, domestic violence, et cetera. I mean, they are hate crimes. They are predicated on misogyny and like the idea that obviously in domestic violence, I mean, the man feels he must control this woman in order to have his identity as a man, or this fantasy that women contaminate men, right? That women not only contaminate men, but contaminate the whole culture. The culture is being feminized. And you see this clearly in like serial killer narratives, right? The attack literally on Jack the Ripper did not rape. He attacked women in the street only once inside and attacked their genitals and their breasts and even made away with the uterus in one case, probably the entire vulva. It doesn't get talked about. That is such a profoundly misogynist attack on what is seen as the essence of the woman or of the feminine. And, many serial killers, Ted Bundy talked about women to him were like potted plants or like pornographic images, that kind of complete objectification. And then if you look at mass shooters like these incels, they are incels. They call themselves incels, these shooters recently in San Diego. They talk about women as femoids, Femoid. That's their language, which means that women are subhuman. So yes, they're shooting up a mosque. There's clearly Islamophobia, but there's some idea that whatever they're identifying as degeneracy or other to them is somehow feminine, whether that be an other racial group, another ethnic group, another species, the planet, women, ourselves, youth. So this attack on all that can be considered feminine and the need to control and obliterate in order to sustain this illusion that I am a man.
Right. It has to be reenacted, like you said, again and again in a sort of ritualistic fashion. And now, of course, back to the question about what has changed since 1987. I mean, one thing I think about, well, how our media diet is filled with dead women and the murder of women. It is such a trope that we don't blink an eye because it's just it's part of the landscape.
I teach a class called Sex Violence Hollywood. And again, dead women and violent men with masculinity itself, and specifically the penis, analogized most ubiquitously to a knife or a gun or a nuclear bomb. So we continually get this propaganda that men are, and we know the penis is not a weapon. The penis is much more like a flower than, a tower or an AK-47, right? It's like, it's a complete denial of material reality. So we get this constant association of masculinity with harm and with violence. And we get women identified with victims over and over. And, the narrative, again, that the woman is a devouring, contaminating presence or an object. We are so used to seeing the narrative built around a murdered, a raped, a body laid out of a woman, that it's become just the ubiquitous wallpaper.
Yes.
But that's also the planet. That's the planet being attacked. I mean, it is individual women. Don't get me wrong. It is youth. But it's also the planet. We know we're in a time of extreme species extinction, of changing climate, and
genocide.
And so these dead women's bodies representing the life force. And I'm not saying men are not the life force. Men are the life force too. But this is like the attack on the life force that is going on, but it's being celebrated. And again, reiterated, ritually reenacted over and over. That makes it seem impossible to resist or avoid.
Yeah, exactly. And so I don't think we talk enough about how much sexual violence is sort of commonplace, pedestrian in our culture's males, that it is something that is in our media diet, of course, pornography, even more so, but it is something that men amongst themselves relate to each other through. It's not sex, it's sexual violence.
Yep. It's in the language. It's in boyhood rituals, right? To sexually harass girls. We hear about bullying at school, but that's often masking that what's really going on is profound sexual harassment. That's the bullying that's going on a great deal. That kind of violence, either being the recipient of it, I feel like people talk about, in these other countries, their genitals are cut, or this goes on, or that goes on. Well, in this culture, girls are sexually harassed and abused. It's the basic initiation rite into womanhood in this culture.
Absolutely.
It traumatizes us. We often cannot report it because we will be blamed, etc. So we are being initiated into patriarchal womanhood with all this abuse. I don't know if any girl remains untouched by that, even if it doesn't actually physically. I mean, she knows about it. She sees it happening to her friends. She hears the jokes and the language. And boys are being initiated into patriarchal manhood through this. And with the complete accessibility of pornography, it's all being acted out. So
acted out and charged for and monetized in different ways and very much like normalized and fused into the culture.
Mm-hmm. And, we still have these debates going on, like with pop stars wearing baby doll dresses or Sabrina Carpenter posing on all fours, man's best friend getting her hair yanked. I mean, if you Google women getting their hair yanked, it's porn, right? It's men abusing women. But she's doing it to herself. She's empowered. I mean, so you have to in some way act like you're attacking a woman's ability to empower herself if you say, no, actually just pretending to be a bad girl or playing out those sexist and those sexually terrorist stereotypes. But now you're in control of them? I don't think so.
Yeah. Yeah, to me, it's just like retrograde patriarchy, but. But I wanted to jump back to the sort of heart of the matter, the serial sex killer, which I don't know if there's any other kind, whether all like that kind of like sadistic serial killing really is, it is all sexual. It's not other things.
Well, if you accept that violence is fused with sexuality, so that even if there isn't a genital attack of some kind, right, if you're using a sexualized weapon, if you're stabbing or, just having that kind of absolute control over another being, when we fuse sex and violence, those acts of domination, of course, Catherine McKinnon and Andrea Dworkin and others theorized this so profoundly, but that domination itself becomes sexual.
Right, that the violence itself is the sex.
Is the sex. Yeah. And then the serial sex killer becomes like this absolute symbol of all that, like a bundle, a package where you don't really even have to analyze it or lay it out in words. I mean, it's just there. It's understood.
Mm-hmm.
And then they become these kind of charismatic, admired figures in some way. Ted Bundy is the poster boy for that, in that he was always said, he's good looking and he's brilliant and he's this. He wasn't really any of those things. He was average looking. He dropped out of law school. He was an alcoholic. He tortured animals when he was a little kid. I mean, no. And he came up from women and hit them from behind.
My biggest bugbear about the way we talk about serial sex killings is this, like, we don't talk about it, as you say, as disgusting misogyny. We really valorize it. Like, we truly, like, all of our media does this, where we talk about him as like a genius or, this like brilliant strategist, or he was able to evade justice in this like ingenious way and diabolically talented at his work, they often call it.
Yeah, they get away with it because often they're picking on the most marginalized groups. Not like, Ted Bundy ultimately attacked women in a sorority at Florida State. But he was caught in Tampa driving the wrong way down a one-way road. Okay, son of Sam got a parking ticket when he was committing a murder. So these are not geniuses, no. But you have to have this, like, this is the folk hero aspect, the supernatural aspect, which I think comes about not only to aggrandize them, but to speak to their ritualistic function. If you go back to like the origins of patriarchy, there are these myths of goddess murder, where the younger male hero, usually with some kind of phallic weapon, slays the original creator, the goddess, the earth mother, etc. So in some ways, they are really reenacting that. And they get this kind of godlike aura because they do fit into that very primal patriarchal myth. But really, they get away with it because they're picking on marginalized people.
Yeah.
They're picking on sex workers. They're picking on poor people.
They harm who they are able to. Isn't that right?
They harm who the society has already thrown away.
Yeah.
And so they're not going to care that much. It's when I remember the Hillside Stranglers or the Yorkshire Ripper, they started out killing sex workers, but then both, like this Hillside Stranglers, snatched two young girls who were waiting for a bus stop. And the Yorkshire Ripper killed a middle-class woman. And the police said, now okay, first you picked prostitutes, but now you're killing innocent women. And that's why I wrote that chapter, Professional Victims, because, so if you were killing sex workers, then that's what their role is, right? That's how it was presented by the police, and not just in that one case.
Yeah, yeah. So you had this like designated group of dirty women who were fair game, who are fair game.
Who are, absolutely.
Yeah. You talk about this like also connected with sort of American pioneer spirit sort of thing, where the serial killer, you say the 20th century outlaw heroes are doers, men of action and record-breaking accomplishments, daring men known by the number they have killed and the territories that they have terrorized. Like, that's kind of our American history.
It is, absolutely.
It's like hand in glove. Anyway, take that.
No, absolutely. My first job was at the University of New Mexico, and I was writing this there. You had to face the history of American genocide of Native people. And how many of our national heroes, be it Kit Carson, or these people who have national forests named after them or whatever, they were genocidal killers of Native people. And like, that's celebrated. So you have to see this paradigm, and sexuality being such a part of that as a way to attack really the essence of people, the spirit. Sarah Deer, who's a Muskogee law professor, has written about this in The Beginning of End of Rape and other works. But she talks about how rape, the land is understood as feminine. So it was understood as rape of the land, the conquest of the Americas. But literal rape and like mutilation of genitals against Native people was used by the conquerors as a way to destroy not only literally the material body of a person, but the spirit of a people.
Yeah.
And again, you have to wonder about like just some kind of, like in The Age of Sex Crime, I say they are propitiating the male god with these kinds of human sacrifices, right? There's always this idea that these gods have to be fed, but are these crimes directing energy to like forces of evil? I don't mean like supernatural forces, but whatever energies gather in a culture that allow this to continue. I do think that's what's going on, right? That this really creates a storm of like continuing, nurturing even that kind of ethos of domination, conquest, femicide, genocide, ecocide, all of them.
Yeah. You do connect it also to war and what men do in formal wars. And I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that rape and sexual murder of women is part and parcel of war, everywhere.
Everywhere. I think in the 90s, like finally, like groups like Amnesty International and others, and ultimately all of us recognize that that kind of rape and sexual terrorism is part of war. It's not just a side effect. It's not just something that happens. It is really an essential stratagem of war to like really destroy a people. In Vietnam, when you read memoirs by Vietnam veterans, some anonymous, some not, they talked about like really that one man who I quote this, he raped a woman, he skinned her, he like stuck something on her vagina and left her there, he said, as a sign of the complete defeat of the enemy. And so when Jack the Ripper leaves his victims out in the street, or the Hillside Strangler dumps or mass murderers create this mayhem, they're leaving that as a sign of their power, a sign of larger destructions, of sacrifice, and really meant to shut us down, our ability to resist. What else has happened since 1987 when I first published? There is greater awareness of misogyny, of the heart. But there are many men who are feminists, right? Who really reject these ideas of masculinity. There is a global resistance movement against femicide, against, what I call gynocide here, but I'd say, femicide has become the word. There is a global movement of resistance to this. And, the backlash is so extreme because we have been so successful in naming this and challenging it and refusing this culture, this society, this definition.
Yeah.
So we always have to remember that, but they are desperate as they feel themselves to be displaced.
Yeah. And I also think when men take the side of women, as in women life freedom movement, or when men sort of switch sides. I think they do so at their peril, at great risk to themselves.
Yeah.
Anti-patriarchal men are, it takes a certain amount of bravery to take that stance.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a movement that is continued. They're trying to shut us down, including in the field that I'm in, education, right? What we can teach and what we can't teach.
Is that right?
In Florida, in a general education class, you can't teach that there's such a thing as structural sexism or structural racism or structural oppression at all, which, so that would be how you connect like these individual acts as participating in a larger system of misogyny. That's not supposed to exist, according to the law in Florida for gen ed classes. They are closing down women, gender, and sexuality studies programs in Texas and elsewhere. This is really, in some ways, acknowledging of the power of this kind of alternative analysis. Also knowing, that there's still many more understandings to be arrived at. So stop the education process.
That's right.
Call us ideologues rather than the people who are silencing and shutting down programs.
Right.
Which is really the ideological move.
Yeah. It's an interesting time to be alive in this and trying to make sense of all the various forces that are colliding, I feel. And this notion that you talk about is that, yes, you have what's going on, the specific of individual acts in the culture, but then you have a cultural script that we may not be aware that we're enacting, or that we may not be aware that we're part of or acting according to. And I think the serial sex killer is very much, in that category. We kind of focus on the individual atrocities that they commit, and we get very involved with like kind of the mysticalness around these characters, but we really fail to look at and critique the cultural script that employed these men, or that the men are employing, so to speak.
Absolutely. Even that exhibit, it said nothing. Oh, these are all men except for Eileen Wuornos, who always gets thrown in, right?
Yes.
Nothing. Take misogyny as the really core guiding principle, and really understanding misogyny in that much larger sense of like not only individual hatred of women, but really embedded in structures of medicine, of religion, the idea that God is male. So yeah, and like some woman, I don't even remember the title now, but she wrote a book about how like Ted Bundy and all these other serial sex killers were all from the Northwest, and they committed these crimes because of pollution.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not saying it's not really polluted and that pollution, but ecocide is connected to femicide, number one, but also no mention of all this feminist work for years on, and not just mine, that said these are crimes of misogyny, right? Just listen to the serial killers themselves. These are crimes of misogyny. And then her book gets the New York Times, the New Yorker, everywhere, right? But if feminists do it, we're sort of dismissed as on the fringe ideologically in pointing this out. And yeah, that is really, you can see I'm getting mad about that, but yeah.
It's maddening because it's the only analysis that kind of covers it from dot to dot. You know what I mean? It makes sense every step of the way. When you call attention to pollution or some other niche idea about like why serial sex murders happen, and you fail to look at it's men murdering women in sexual ways, it's like, yeah. I wanted to talk about this idea also that in the hunt for the serial killer, where you have like the heroes hunting for the killer on the one side, and the police kind of like trying to figure out his movements and trying to trap the guy. And the killer, by doing what he does and managing not to get caught, it makes this kind of like an adventure with heroes, making heroes out of police or law enforcement or whatever. I mean, we have this whole true crime genre that people are, women particularly, are obsessed with. That's all about this, like the tracking down of serial killers. And I feel like...
And it's like, in a way, it's revelatory in that the cop, mostly the male cop, he becomes this doppelganger or double of the serial killer. And in a way, it's acknowledging that this is this deeply rooted in a social construction of masculinity, and, that this bonding over sexual violence that is taking place. I mean, you could say, well, why are you writing about all this, Jane? And I think it's because from an early childhood, I recognized sexual terrorism, that these figures were out there, that whether it be the abusive neighbor down the street or the family member, or, I remember watching a show. I was born in 1953. There was some black and white TV show. I have no idea what it was. And this man was with a woman, and he forced her down on the couch and started to strangle her with like a wire coat hanger. And I'm watching this and I'm like, I don't know, 8, and thinking I had no context for understanding that, but like it went into my head. And then Psycho, movies like Psycho. I mean, I knew women were prey. And I think I was always wanting to resist that and fight that and understand that and point that out as wrong. So I understand why women are drawn. And like my students always tell me, well, we want to see this because we want to be able to recognize these guys. We are obsessed with understanding Ted Bundy because, he was always presented as like somebody who you might know and date or something like that. The woman who lived with him reported him to the police and said, I think he's the Ted killer. And they never followed up on it. So I think this also speaks to that women have boyfriends, heterosexual women have boyfriends and husbands that they think might be rapists and serial killers to an alarming extent. And I think that's one reason they're looking at true crime as well.
Absolutely. I'm just thinking of you as an 8-year-old girl, kind of knowing so early that you were prey. And as you write about, like that women in this media diet of the serial sex murder, that we know we're prey. We know we identify with the silencing of the women getting killed. And the men identify with the murderers. And there's enjoyment in that.
There is. I mean, of course, it's never just completely uniform.
No. Yeah. Course. But they're invited to.
They're invited to. Thank you. They are invited to. This is who you identify with. And you certainly don't want to be the victim. So you better identify with the perpetrator if you're a boy or a man. Absolutely. Because you don't want to be a victim. Let them do it to her. Don't have them do it to you. Like Ted Bundy is almost presented as a sex symbol. He was played by male actors who were considered to be sex symbols. The thing about the sexual terrorism is this is functioning just like other kinds of terrorism. Like it is meant to instill fear in us and shut us up, identify with the silence victim, become our self-silence and restrict our freedom. They don't necessarily have to do it to us. We will take in that message and
behave.
Yeah.
Yeah. Out of fear and paralysis,
That's why Me Too was so strong, because everybody identifying this system. Oh, this isn't just me. This is so many. And it has a purpose. And these stereotypes of good girls and bad girls. And all of this is part of it. And everybody keeps saying, oh, Me Too failed or it's gone away. But I don't think so.
Oh, I don't think so.
It had a profound influence on really, what's a red flag? And no, this guy can't be behaving this way. And it's not okay. But, the backlash is there, of course, yeah.
The backlash is there, but I also think there's a pushback against the backlash now. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the women in your class that talk about why they watch true crime and what they're looking for and what they're looking to learn.
They want to be educated.
They want to be educated. And I think that, in a sense, is pushback against that. And I think there's a big conversation happening now on social media, certainly. I'm on TikTok a lot, so I hear this conversation all the time where women are talking about all of the lower grade, maybe terror in their relationships, and where they are so informed by true crime and what they see out there in the landscape that they look at their partners very differently, critically, in like, am I sleeping next to who I think I'm sleeping next to?
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, again, the shocking number of young girls who have been in, and I think gay youth as well, in abusive relationships, because they haven't gotten the education about it. But again, Me Too, there is this sort of grassroots education going on about it, which I think is very important.
Yeah. I want to talk about this connection that you make between, I had an episode a few episodes back talking to two Scottish scholars who did a big research project in a book about the witch hunt in Scotland.
Mm.
And we talked about the witch pricker as a character. And when I read your book, it was like such a ping that this is the precursor to the serial killer. This is like some kind of blueprint. So can you connect the way you do in the book, like that witch hunting did not end?
No, it didn't end. This kind of mass assault, femicidal assault on women in the European witch craze, right? And then, a little side offshoot in Salem and North New England, where women were hanged and men were also killed in Salem and the surrounding area. But it took place between 1450, 1750 in Europe. And there had been a folk belief that there were women, they were healers. Maybe they worshiped the goddess Diana in the woods or went night riding with Diana. There were all these folk beliefs. But the church turned it into a demonology that these women, because of their sexual lust, this was a period where women were seen as more sexual than men. And their sexuality was extremely dangerous, going back to Eve. So fired up with lust that they had sex with Satan. And that's what witchcraft was. It was a demonological pact with Satan. So this gave both church and state license. And they were the ones who were the sexual fiends, really. And it was in this witch pricker. Women who were taken as so-called witches were stripped. They would take this long needle and poke them all over their bodies because supposedly witches had a spot that was insensitive to pain. And if they could find that, they could prove she was a witch. But this was just an excuse to torture and rape women. And this is under the auspices of church and state. And supposedly they weren't raping and sexually torturing women. They were doing supposedly God's work, right? I mean, it's just...
Right. You have a quote in the book where you say, witch prickers clearly anticipated the characteristic methods of the rippers and stabbers who emerged to plague Western women in the 19th century.
So the witch craze, there's all these different ways to create women as the enemy. And then in some way lead various campaigns against women. And it takes place different forms around the country, around the world, I mean. There's different ways to silence and hurt and persecute women.
But, in some sense, I feel like just like the witch prickers could be connected to today's serial sex murders, I also think the kind of like selecting out of prostitutes, as what you touched on earlier about the professional victims. So it's this kind of like corralling off of, certain women that are deemed unworthy or dirty or whatever. Yeah.
There's always been that, right? That's that sexual double standard that allows them to keep some women for themselves and like that trad wife thing or whatever, and then have these other women, be they feminists or witches or sex workers, who will be demonized and attacked. Yeah. And, what is a witch? Matilda Joslyn Gage, the great 19th century feminist, said, the witch was in reality the scientist of the age, the healer. And so women's knowledge, women seeking knowledge, women joining together, and so-called the witch was, part of this coven and worshiping the devil, but it wasn't. That's their fantasy. But like the idea of women bonding, coming together and exercising power and being bearers of knowledge is still taboo.
Yeah. You make another connection that I'm also interested in, which is that gynecology and sex serial murders, you connect in your book. And so can you talk about that connection?
I mean, gynecology arose. I mean, when you got rid of the midwives and like the herbalist healers and stuff, some historians argue that was to clear the way for a new class of male physicians. So it was a way to like eliminate the competition so they could claim this profession. But they also brought with it this fear and this fetishization of women's bodies. And critics talked about like just in gynecology, this idea that what gynecology was often seen as was taking knives to women's genitals, right? And the founder of gynecology was this American doctor, J. Marion Sims, who invented gynecological surgery working on anesthetized Black enslaved women.
Oh, that's so disgusting.
Yeah, I know. It's like, and there was a statue to him in Central Park, and I can't remember the name of the artist, Black feminist artist who went and poured blood on the statue. And I think the statue's finally been taken down, and there's a statue to the women who he operated on. So this is what I mean. Like the narrative is changing. The silenced voice is emerging. But so
Yes.
gynecology was founded in torture and abuse and enslavement of women. There's no parallel kind of operations on men's genitals, right? Or,
Yeah.
and some of these, like, you know, whether it's an episiotomy or these unnecessary hysterectomies, or in the 19th century, they went from saying women were witches to saying women were hysterical. And in the United States, taking out their ovaries and sometimes their clitorises.
As a cure.
As a cure, right, as a cure. So we see this kind of maliciousness, a continuation of that kind of persecution of women in gynecology, which is not to say all gynecologists, right? We probably all go to gynecologists. We need healthcare when we need healthcare. But the way that medicine has been so male-centered and women's bodies not really understood or appreciated.
For who we are and what we are. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, denial of healthcare.
I know this is probably like politically very incorrect, but I've always wondered what the fuck men are doing in gynecology. But, you know, that's
Yeah.
me.
I know.
I just don't understand it.
But there's women who are urologists. There is a mistrust of men, right? Because so many women have been subjected to sexual harassment and abuse. So there is a mistrust of men. Of course, many women, particularly in the 70s with feminism, really put out the demand, our bodies ourselves, right? Knowledge about our bodies, realizing that medicine, including standard gynecology, was really hostile in many ways to women. Kept information, like we needed knowledge of our own bodies and we needed to activate that kind of respect and knowledge in the gynecological profession. A movement that's still very necessary and happening. And see what's happening with like the restrictions on abortion care. Women are dying. How is that not part of the witch persecutions? We know women have been denied care because they're having a miscarriage and they won't evacuate the womb and they get an infection and they die because the doctors are afraid of going to jail in these states that do not allow any abortion. So this is part of the extended witch craze as well. Absolutely.
In that ideology, the womb is something that women themselves shouldn't be in charge of.
Or that the female body is just a receptacle, a subhuman, right?
Yes.
So-called femoid in the incel speak. And that, Catherine McKinnon wrote that book, Are Women Human? I mean, that's still that dehumanization that is so essential to any kind of oppressive structure, but it certainly is laid on women.
Yeah. And we thought we had gotten somewhere.
We've gotten somewhere, but we can't stop fighting.
No, we can't. Well, I think this book, Age of Sex Crime, is like as relevant, if not more relevant today than when you wrote it. And I think it just ought to be like this. Sex crimes and sex serial murdering should be such a top of the list of the things we talk about. It is so urgent, so goes to the heart of the cultural scripts we're acting out.
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you. I'm not going to disagree. At the end, I named so many of the women who were killed, right? Because we know all these men's names and we don't know the names of the women who were killed. We don't really honor their legacy. And if you go to Canada, you will find actual monuments to like murdered and missing Indigenous women, as well as women of all ethnicities who have been murdered in femicidal attacks. And we don't have that in the United States.
No.
If you go to Boston, there's no monument to the women killed by the Boston Strangler, and there should be.
Yeah.
I mean, how do we remember these events? With a Jack the Ripper museum in London and like this Mind of a Serial Killer that really avoids the question of misogyny in New York. But there really should be monuments to the women and memorials to the women who were so grievously attacked and abused and tortured and killed. Yeah, we need a wall honoring victims of femicide and swearing never again.
Exactly. But instead, the killer remains the main character in the story. It's so frustrating. And like you said, the silencing is really, it really is that. And it just shouldn't be, and we should just pay a lot more attention to it as a misogynist phenomena that needs to be fought much harder against.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
Really, I'm just so honored that you asked to talk with me again and that you're paying attention to a book I wrote 40 years ago that, like authors, we write these things out of our minds and our hearts and just like every force, social, spiritual, emotional, intellectual that has shaped us. It's always like gratifying to be heard. So thank you.
I'm so thrilled we got to have the conversation, and great talking to you. Thank you for listening to Subject to Power. You can find the show online at subjecttopower.com or subscribe to the show wherever you find your podcasts. I'd love to know your thoughts on these conversations, so please drop a note on the website or find us on social media. The best way to support the show is to rate and review Subject to Power on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other listeners find us. Subject to Power is written, hosted, and produced by me, Elle. Audio engineering is done by Jason Sheasley at Abridged Audio, cover art by B. Johnson, and music by Beware of Darkness.